you ever invested in a CD or a certificate of deposit, chances are if you wanted that guaranteed return, that return was much lower than you could see with different investment vehicles. And that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today is 3 ways and 3 better investments that you should do instead of getting CDs at all. And these examples are ones that I actually see in my day-to-day life. Now, of course, when it comes to investing, there is no best, and I really do put it in quotes, best investment out there. Really depends on the way that you're managing your money and also the term that you do want for the money. If it's short term, which we know is about a year or less, if you're looking for that midterm, what could be kind of that 1 to 5 years, if you're looking greater than 5 years, this is really the way to do it. And of course, getting the most bang for your buck. Right now, we know certificates of deposit are running about 5%. That's about average for promotional CDs, which means they are staying a little bit ahead of inflation. But overall, when inflation was 9%, CDs were running 5%. You can get a lot better returns depending what you want to invest in. In today's video, we're looking at 3 better investments for the CD money instead of tying it up in those term deposits. Starting with number 1, better investments for long term. If you're thinking 5 years plus, we are looking at the S&P 500 ETF or the VOO. The big difference between savings and investing, savings is very low risk or really no risk, but it also generates a very low return. When you start tacking on the interest that CDs are paying, like I said, currently they are paying about 5%. But when you look at the S&P 500, you're yielding about 9.9%. So versus getting the 5%, which we know is guaranteed, getting a 10%, which of course can have some ups and downs, but that 10% is really the average. So when you start thinking of long-term investing, ensuring that 5 years plus, you can kind of get the benefit of the average return of the S&P 500 of that 10%, which of course, there can be ups, there can be downs. Now, when it comes to involvement with investing, stocks, ETF, bonds, properties, there's a lot that you can find that are a lot higher, but we're looking for a little bit more of a safer risk and a little bit more of a risk that is similar to CDs, because of course, when you start looking at property, when you start looking at specific stocks, chances are better return, chances are much lower return because you have a much higher risk. Now, of course, when we look at the S&P 500, me personally, ETF investing is the only way that I do. When you look at the index, the S&P 500, over the past 30 years, we have seen an average return of 10%, which of course is double what we're seeing on those CDs. This is really looking at the index itself. And when you look at the index, you are automatically diversified because you are putting it in the 500 largest companies within the US. So you have a mix of companies, you have a mix of industries, you have a mix of sectors. In addition, when you look at the S&P 500, the weighted average, it is accounting for about 80% of the entire stock market. So when you think of going in there and putting money into that S&P 500, it is really the best way to do it. When you look at Warren Buffett, when you look at a lot of the successful investors, the S&P 500 investing is really the good way to go. Now, of course, not tying that money up in a CD, better investments if you don't have an emergency fund. This, of course, do not tie your money up in CDs if you do not have that emergency fund built. What I've seen a lot of times is people will come in, they want the return on a CD. They will lock it up for an extended amount of time. Within usually a month to maybe 3 months, they need the money they put in the CD. They locked up everything they had. They didn't have money set aside for that emergency fund, which means not only are they not getting the return from the CD, but CDs have penalties. If you terminate a CD early, there's going to be a penalty. And for a lot of people, it is about 3 to 6 months of interest that would have been earned in the CD, which means if you sign up for a CD, a month later, you're taking the money out, chances are you are going to have negative principal. So you're actually losing money by taking the money out of the CD. Now, of course, when we look at the emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of expenses set aside, this is where a high yield savings account is going to come in. Personally, I use M1 Finance, and funny enough, because CDs right now are running about 5%, high yield savings account through M1 Finance are running 5%. So that's right, even though you're not locking it up for any term, which of course, a term of 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, whatever it may be, you're not locking it up for a term, you're still getting the 5% return in liquid assets with those high yield savings, which of course is about the national average that we're seeing right now. So if you have that emergency fund, you have to park it somewhere. If you have it in regular savings accounts, if you have the money literally just sitting there, inflation is going to be eating up that emergency fund, even if it's years before you use it. If it is not in something that is actually building that emergency fund, you're going to be losing money to inflation, which is the reason why you have to keep it in that high yield savings. And guys, speaking of high yield savings, before we get into our last one, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about the videos we're putting out there. And let's look at this final one. Third one we look at is the better investment if you carry debt at all, paying it off. So for a lot of individuals that I see, they will come in and put money into CDs at that 5% yield while they're carrying credit card debt, which again is kind of crazy. When you think about it mathematically, if I am running 25% APY on credit cards, I am signing up for a 5% CD, which means my net for that is negative 20% return automatically. The adjustment phase or the changes with credit cards themselves, the rates are not going to go down anytime soon. And really, credit card companies are keeping them really high, around 26%, which is kind of crazy, which means you're going to have a sky high rate, not the time to be putting money into CDs, which is kind of crazy. So let's say you have $5,000 to invest and you have a credit card balance of that amount. If you're putting that into a CD, that's right, you're not making any money by putting it into the CD. If you paid off your credit card balance with that $5,000, not only do you not have the credit card balance, which means it is going to improve your credit score, but you could end up being over $1,000 richer just based on the APR that we see on the average by putting $5,000 onto those credit card balances instead of putting money into the CDs. Now, of course, a couple scenarios that we want to run through. When you put money, there's really a methodology behind it. Number one, paying off the debt. When you think of the debt repayment before you do any CDs, like we said, even outside of credit card debt, if you're paying a loan, let's say you have a personal loan, you have a credit card, whatever it is, if you're paying a higher interest for the debt than you're going to be getting as a return, pay off the debt in its entirety. And honestly, for the peace of mind, for the cash flow, for everything else, I would pay off the debt in its entirety. Again, systematically thinking of the way to do this, debt elimination is going to free up your cash. It is going to give you the ability to build up that emergency fund. It is going to give you the ability to invest like we see, which of course, for the second one of this is building up the emergency fund. Once you get to the point of debt elimination and you've eliminated the debt, you've freed up some cash, that is the time you want to build up that emergency fund, short of putting it into the CDs. And once that emergency fund is fully funded, this is the time that we're going to step essentially into the first step, the long-term investing when it comes to that S&P 500. So at this point, you've paid off your debt, you built up your emergency fund. That is the time that you are going to have a lot of cash flow. You don't have the debt, the emergency fund is done. You can put an exorbitant amount of money into that S&P 500 fund and build it sky high as fast as possible because you know that everything has already been covered. And of course, when you look at CDs, and again, you look at the rates, even though it is guaranteed money, chances are a majority of CDs aren't paying enough to beat out inflation. And if they are, it is a very, very small amount that you're going to be earning from the CDs. Even though the 5% looks really good on paper, when you're getting 10% on the investment, it does make a lot more sense. Sorry guys, so that is going to do it for today's video. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. And as always, thank you guys for watching.